The family meeting about selling my apartment had barely started when my son Garrett suddenly slammed his fist on the table. "Stay quiet when the adults are talking," he shouted, his face red with anger. Everyone froze. This was the boy I'd raised alone after his mother died, the child I'd sacrificed everything for. Without a word, I stood up, walked calmly to the garden, and dialed a number I'd hoped I'd never have to use. 5 minutes later, his wife's phone rang. The desperate scream that followed told me everything was about to change. I spent 40 years as a high school English teacher at Lincoln High, teaching thousands of teenagers about the power of words and stories. When my wife Sarah died of breast cancer 20 years ago, Garrett was only 12 years old. The loss devastated both of us, but somehow we managed to hold each other up through the darkest days. Our modest 2-bedroom apartment became our sanctuary, the place where we learned to live again without her. Those walls held so many memories. The Christmas when 14-year-old Garrett surprised me with handmade bookshelves built in woodshop class. The kitchen table where we celebrated his college acceptance letter with chocolate cake at midnight. The living room where we hosted his small wedding reception when he married Stephanie. Everyone crowded together, laughing and toasting to new beginnings. Throughout those years, I was careful with money, setting aside what I could from my teacher's salary for retirement. The apartment was my most significant asset, purchased long before the neighborhood became fashionable. I'd paid off the mortgage 5 years ago, giving me security in my retirement. My financial advisor, Janet, had helped me create a solid plan, eventually sell the apartment, use the proceeds to move into suitable senior housing, and have enough left to help both my children with their futures. Last month, I received a diagnosis that changed everything. My cardiologist found a condition that would require ongoing treatment at a specialized cardiac center across town. The apartment that had been my haven was now too far from the medical care I needed, and the 3 flights of stairs were becoming difficult for me to manage. The time had come to implement my retirement plan. When I met with a real estate agent, I was shocked to learn that my apartment had tripled in value. The neighborhood had become one of the most desirable in the city, with new businesses and transportation improvements driving up prices. What I had considered a modest nest egg was now substantial. I would have more than enough to secure comfortable housing near the medical center, help both my children, and still maintain a safety net for myself. I decided to share the news with my children individually before calling a family meeting. My daughter Amy, who lived 2 hours away with her husband Jack, was supportively practical as always. "Dad, this makes so much sense. Jack and I have been worried about those stairs for years, and being closer to your doctors is important. Plus, you've worked hard for this. You deserve to be comfortable." She asked thoughtful questions about my plans, offered to help with the moving logistics, and even suggested researching senior communities near her home as an option. Her response reassured me that I was making the right decision. Garrett's reaction, however, caught me off guard. When I mentioned the apartment sale over Sunday dinner at his house, both he and Stephanie showed excessive enthusiasm. "Dad, this is perfect timing. My buddy Dylan just got his real estate license and he's hungry for his first big sale. I'll call him tonight," Garrett said, pulling out his phone before dessert was even served. Stephanie chimed in. "We can help you sort through everything. I know the perfect moving company. How quickly do you want to be out? We could probably get things rolling this week." Their eagerness was disconcerting. I'd expected questions about my health, concerns about such a big change, or at least some nostalgia about the apartment where Garrett had spent most of his childhood. Instead, they seemed impatient to get the process started, almost as if they had been waiting for this opportunity. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not in a rush," I said carefully. "I want to take my time, make sure I find the right place before selling." Garrett exchanged a quick glance with Stephanie. "The market's hot right now, Dad. You don't want to miss the window. Dylan says prices might drop soon." Something about their urgency felt wrong. I'd been a teacher long enough to recognize when someone was trying to rush me into a decision. By the time I left their house that evening, Garrett had already texted his friend Dylan, who had promised to bring listing paperwork the next day. On the drive home, I realized what had bothered me most. Not once had either of them asked what I wanted or needed. They had immediately taken control, pushing their own timeline and connections. For the first time, I felt a chill of doubt about my son's intentions. The following weeks brought an unusual pattern of behavior. Garrett, who typically visited once or twice a month, started dropping by almost daily. During these visits, he would wander through the apartment, examining light fixtures, testing windows, and measuring walls with his eyes. "Just checking if anything needs fixing before the sale," he explained when I questioned him. Stephanie began coming along, snapping photos with her phone. When I asked about the pictures, she smiled brightly. "Just capturing memories, Frank. This place means so much to all of us." But I noticed she was photographing odd things. The view from windows, the condition of the hardwood floors, the updated kitchen appliances, not the family photos or the living room where we'd celebrated holidays. Not the memories, but the selling points. One afternoon while Garrett used the bathroom, I overheard him on his cell phone through the thin wall. "We'll definitely have the money soon. No, don't worry, it's happening. Just stall them another month." He emerged, looking startled to see me standing in the hallway, quickly changing the subject to the weather. My suspicions grew stronger when I found real estate listings in Garrett's car while helping him carry in groceries he'd brought. The printouts showed apartments similar to mine, but listed at prices far below what my agent had estimated. When I mentioned this discrepancy to Garrett, he shrugged. "Different market conditions. Dylan knows what he's doing." That evening, I searched online for information about Garrett's restaurant business, a small bistro he'd opened 2 years earlier. The venture had been a point of pride for him, though he rarely discussed the details with me. What I found disturbed me. Review sites showed the restaurant had closed 3 months ago, with comments suggesting financial mismanagement. There had been no announcement, no explanation to me about this significant change in his life. Concerned, I called my old friend Janet, the financial advisor who had helped me plan for retirement. "Frank, I don't want to make accusations, but these behaviors raise red flags," she said after I explained the situation. "I've seen similar patterns with other clients. Sometimes family members get desperate when they have financial troubles." At her suggestion, I hired Thomas Miller, a private investigator who specialized in financial matters. I felt guilty doing this behind Garrett's back, but I needed to understand what was happening. Thomas's findings confirmed my worst fears. Garrett had not only lost the restaurant but was deeply in debt. Credit card statements showed maxed accounts, large cash withdrawals at casinos, and missed payments. More troubling were the loan applications he'd submitted using his childhood address, my address, as his own. The stress of these discoveries affected my health. My blood pressure rose to concerning levels, and I developed insomnia for the first time in my life. During one of my sleepless nights, I stood at the window watching the street below, wondering how my relationship with my son had come to this point. The next morning, my neighbor Dorothy knocked on my door. "Frank, I thought you should know. There were people looking around your apartment yesterday while you were at your doctor's appointment. A young couple with a realtor. I assumed you knew about it. I hadn't known. I hadn't given anyone permission to show my apartment, especially while I was out." When I confronted Garrett by phone, he dismissed my concerns. "Dad, Dylan just wanted a feel for the place. It wasn't a real showing. You're getting worked up over nothing." After that call, I took steps to protect myself. I installed a small security camera in the living room bookshelf, hidden among my collection of classic novels. Within days, it captured Stephanie letting herself in with a key I hadn't given her, accompanied by a man carrying an appraiser's clipboard and camera. But the most disturbing discovery came when I picked up my medical records for my new cardiologist. Reviewing the file in my car, I found a notation from my primary physician. "Patient's son reports increasing confusion and possible early dementia symptoms. Suggests cognitive evaluation." My hands shook as I read those words. Garrett had never mentioned such concerns to me. Instead, he had gone behind my back to my doctor, planting seeds of doubt about my mental competence. The implications were clear and frightening. If he could convince others I was no longer capable of managing my affairs, he could potentially gain control of my assets, including the proceeds from my apartment sale. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, the room where I had once helped Garrett with his homework, where we had shared meals and dreams and grief. I felt a different kind of grief now, the loss of trust in my only son. The apartment that had been our sanctuary now felt like contested territory, and I knew the battle was just beginning. The next morning, While organizing my financial documents, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Among my papers was a sales agreement for the apartment with what appeared to be my signature at the bottom. The problem was, I had never seen this document before, never agreed to these terms, and certainly never signed my name to them. The sale price listed was nearly 30% below market value, and the buyer was an LLC with an unfamiliar name. When I called the notary whose stamp appeared on the document, she had no record of me in her appointment book. Someone had forged my signature and falsified a notarization. My hands trembled as I placed the paper in a folder labeled evidence. That afternoon, Garrett stopped by unexpectedly. When I attempted to discuss the apartment sale and my plans for finding appropriate senior housing, his tone became dismissive. "Dad, you're overcomplicating things. We've already found a buyer willing to do a quick close. Just sign the papers Dylan's bringing tomorrow, and we'll handle everything else." "I'd like to review the offer with my own attorney first," I replied. Garrett rolled his eyes. "You're being paranoid. This is a straightforward sale. Why waste money on attorney fees? You're not exactly in a position to throw money around." His condescending tone was new, as if he were speaking to a child rather than his father. When I mentioned my preference for housing near my current neighborhood, he quickly countered. "Actually, Stephanie and I have been looking at some nice facilities near Lake Pine." Lake Pine was over 300 miles away, far from my friends, my doctors, and my community. When I expressed concern about the distance, Garrett waved away my objection. "The medical care there is excellent, much better than what you'll find here. Plus, it's affordable." Later, I used my computer to research facilities in the Lake Pine area. What I found weren't the comfortable senior communities I had envisioned, but primarily state-subsidized nursing homes with minimal amenities and spotty inspection records. One had been cited repeatedly for neglect. Meanwhile, Stephanie had been busy sharing concerns about my declining health with extended family members. My sister-in-law Brenda called from Florida, speaking slowly and loudly as if I had suddenly lost my hearing along with my supposed mental faculties. "Frank, honey, Stephanie tells us you've been having some trouble lately. Forgetting things? Getting confused? It's nothing to be ashamed of. We all get older." Soon, cousins and friends were calling to check on me, their voices tinged with concern based on rumors they'd heard. Each conversation followed the same pattern: kind inquiries about my health, gentle suggestions about accepting help, and comments about how fortunate I was to have such a caring son looking after my interests. The isolation was growing. People who had known me for decades were now viewing me through a lens crafted by Garrett and Stephanie. Even my weekly lunch with retired colleagues became uncomfortable when one friend asked if I needed a ride because Garrett mentioned you probably shouldn't be driving anymore. A minor fall in my bathroom, nothing more than a stumble that left a small bruise on my arm, became ammunition. Garrett insisted on taking me to urgent care, where he spoke to the doctor before I could, emphasizing my frequent falls and increasing disorientation. There had been no previous falls, no disorientation, but the doctor looked at me differently after that conversation, asking me questions about my living situation and whether I had considered more supportive housing options. For a brief, terrible moment, I began to doubt myself. Was I actually declining and failing to recognize it? Was my suspicion of Garrett's motives a symptom of paranoia rather than legitimate concern? The fear that I might be losing my grip on reality was more terrifying than the thought of financial exploitation. I scheduled an appointment with a neurologist, Dr. Patricia Washington, without telling Garrett. After extensive cognitive testing and a thorough examination, she was unequivocal in her assessment. "Mr. Thompson, your cognitive function is excellent, particularly for someone your age. Your memory, problem-solving abilities, and executive function all test well above average. There is absolutely no indication of dementia or significant cognitive decline." The relief was immense, but short-lived. The confirmation of my competence meant I wasn't imagining things. My son was deliberately attempting to undermine my independence and gain control of my assets. Amy had been watching these developments with growing concern. Living 2 hours away, she wasn't witness to the daily manipulations, but she had noticed the change in Garrett's behavior during family phone calls and video chats. "Dad, something isn't right," she told me during a private call. Garrett keeps talking about your condition to everyone, but when I ask for specifics, he's vague. And Stephanie made a strange comment about renovating their kitchen. Once things are settled with your dad, what's going on? I shared my concerns, and Amy's support strengthened my resolve. You need to document everything, she advised. Every conversation, every unusual incident. If they're trying to manipulate you, we need evidence. Following her advice, I began keeping detailed records. I installed additional security cameras, recorded phone calls, legal in our state with one-party consent, and made copies of all financial documents. The evidence painted a disturbing picture of systematic deception. The final confirmation came when Thomas, the private investigator, delivered his latest findings. He had discovered documents for power of attorney with my forged signature, granting Garrett full control over my financial and medical decisions. Even more alarming, there was evidence of attempted access to my retirement accounts, blocked only because the financial institution had required in-person verification. That evening, I sat in my living room surrounded by folders of evidence documenting my son's betrayal. The apartment that had witnessed our shared grief and recovery after Sarah's death was now the prize in a game I never wanted to play. I made a decision. It was time to confront Garrett directly, with witnesses present and evidence in hand. I would call a family meeting that would change everything. I spent 3 days preparing for the confrontation. Each document was organized chronologically in labeled folders: unauthorized apartment showings, forged signatures, medical record manipulations, recorded conversations with realtors and financial institutions. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. The morning before the meeting, Amy arrived early to help with final preparations. Her husband Jack had taken the day off work to join us. Together, we set up a discreet recording device under the dining room table. "Just in case," Amy said, squeezing my hand. My brother-in-law Steve and his wife Linda drove in from the next state. My cousin Paul and his wife Maria, who had always been close to our family, arrived shortly after. I had invited them without explaining the full situation, saying only that I needed their support during an important family discussion about my future. At 2 o'clock, Garrett and Stephanie arrived. To my surprise, they brought someone with them, a man in a suit who Garrett introduced as Alan Wilson, just a family friend who happens to be an attorney. "He's here to help with any paperwork you might need to sign today, Dad." The presumption was staggering. They had brought a lawyer to a family meeting, expecting me to sign documents without prior discussion. I noticed Amy's jaw tighten as she exchanged glances with Jack. We gathered in the living room, where I had arranged chairs in a semicircle. The folders of evidence sat on the coffee table before me. Stephanie immediately took charge, pouring coffee and distributing cookies as if she were already the hostess of my home. "Let's get started," I said once everyone was seated. I called this meeting to discuss my plans for selling this apartment and my next steps. Garrett leaned forward, smiling. "Great, Dad. Dylan's already got a buyer lined up, and Alan here can handle the closing documents today if you're ready." "Actually," I continued, "I want to be very clear about my intentions. I do plan to sell this apartment, but on my own terms and timeline. I've consulted with Riverside Realty, and they've assessed the current market value at significantly more than the offer your friend Dylan presented." I opened the first folder and passed around the professional market analysis. Garrett's face flushed as family members examined the document. "The proceeds from this sale will provide for my future housing near my current medical team, with enough left to establish trusts for both you and Amy, as I've always planned." Before I could continue, Stephanie interjected, speaking slowly as if addressing a child. "Frank, I think you might be confused about the current real estate market. Dylan explained to us that prices are actually dropping in this neighborhood." "That's not accurate," I replied calmly, opening another folder. "Here are the sales records for similar units in this building over the past 6 months. The trend shows consistent increases in value." Garrett began to interrupt, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished. Over the past several weeks, I've become aware of unauthorized showings of my apartment while I was away. I passed around statements from neighbors and security camera footage showing Stephanie leading strangers through my home. Family members shifted uncomfortably, looking between me and Garrett. His attorney friend Alan straightened his tie, suddenly seeming less confident. Furthermore, I continued. I've discovered attempts to significantly undervalue my property, presumably to facilitate a quick sale at below market rates. I shared the falsified appraisal documents that Thomas had uncovered. Stephanie's face had gone pale. Garrett repeatedly tried to interrupt me, his voice growing louder with each attempt. Dad, you're blowing things out of proportion. We were just trying to help you move forward with your plans. You've been so forgetful lately. I have documented evidence contradicting that claim as well, I said, opening another folder. Here's a recent comprehensive neurological evaluation confirming my full cognitive competence. Dr. Washington has also provided a statement refuting the claims about my mental status that were made to my primary physician without my knowledge. As the meeting progressed, I methodically presented each piece of evidence: the forged sales agreement, the unauthorized credit checks, the research on substandard nursing facilities far from my home and medical team. The room grew increasingly tense as the full picture emerged. Steve, who had always been close to Garrett, looked stunned. "Is this true?" he asked, turning to my son. "You were going to move Frank hundreds of miles away without his consent?" Garrett's demeanor shifted from dismissive to defensive. His face reddened as he stood up suddenly. "This is ridiculous. Dad's obviously been influenced by Amy. She's always been jealous of our relationship. Dad and I had an understanding about the apartment sale. He's just forgotten our discussions." "There was no such understanding," I said firmly. "Stay quiet when the adults are talking." Garrett suddenly shouted, slamming his fist on the coffee table. Coffee cups rattled, and my sister-in-law Linda gasped. The room fell silent. In that moment, I saw my son clearly not as the boy I had raised with love and sacrifice, but as a desperate man willing to bully his own father for financial gain. The person standing before me was a stranger wearing my son's face. Without a word, I stood up and walked past him, through the kitchen, and out to the garden where Sarah's roses still bloomed each spring. In the quiet sanctuary among her flowers, I pulled out my cell phone and made the call I had been dreading but knew was necessary. I sat on the garden bench beneath the trellis Sarah had built 25 years ago. The late afternoon sun filtered through the climbing roses, casting dappled shadows on my hands as I dialed the number. My fingers weren't shaking anymore. The shock and hurt had crystallized into something harder resolve. 3 weeks earlier, after discovering the forged power of attorney documents, I had met with my attorney Claire Jackson to prepare for this very scenario. "Hope for the best, plan for the worst," she had advised, helping me draft contingency measures that would protect my assets and autonomy if Garrett's behavior escalated. "Document everything," Claire had said. "Record conversations if legal in your state. Keep a journal of all unusual incidents. Make copies of any suspicious paperwork. And most importantly, secure your original documents in a safe place outside your home." I had followed her advice meticulously. My will, deed, financial statements, and medical directives were now in a safety deposit box that only I and Amy could access. Digital copies were encrypted and stored online where Garrett couldn't find them. But my most significant preparation had been a series of quiet meetings with Thomas Miller. Thomas wasn't just a private investigator. He was also a senior fraud investigator at First National Bank, Garrett's bank. Our connection went back 15 years to when I had helped his son through a difficult period in high school. When I explained my suspicions about Garrett's financial activities, Thomas had listened with growing concern. "Frank, based on what you're describing, there may be irregularities that extend beyond your personal situation," he had told me during our third meeting. "Some of these patterns suggest financial improprieties that could potentially involve bank assets or other clients. I can't give details due to confidentiality, but there have been red flags around certain accounts." Thomas had set up a protocol. If I ever found myself in a situation where immediate intervention was necessary, I would call him with a simple message: "I've decided to move forward with Plan B." That would authorize him to launch a formal investigation into Garrett's banking activities and any potentially fraudulent uses of my information. As I sat in the garden now, I dialed Thomas's number. When he answered, my voice was steady. "Thomas, it's Frank Thompson. I've decided to move forward with Plan B." "Are you certain, Frank? Once this process begins, I won't be able to stop it." I thought of Garrett's shout, "Stay quiet when the adults are talking," and the years of sacrifice I had made to raise him after Sarah died. I'm certain, understood. I have enough documentation to begin a formal investigation immediately. The bank's fraud department will contact Stephanie within minutes to verify certain transactions. They won't mention your involvement at this stage. After ending the call with Thomas, I sat for a moment collecting my thoughts. Then I made a second call to Claire. "It's time," I told her. "Please activate the emergency guardianship revocation and the restraining order we prepared." "I'll file the papers immediately," she assured me. "The temporary protective order should be granted within the hour given the evidence we've assembled. I'll also notify the real estate agencies as we discussed." As I ended the call, I noticed my reflection in the garden pond Sarah had installed. The man looking back at me seemed older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper. But there was strength in his expression that hadn't been there weeks ago when this ordeal began. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and prepared to return to the family meeting. Before I could stand, Amy appeared at the garden door. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "I am," I said, surprised to find it was true. "I've just set some necessary things in motion. Garrett's getting really agitated in there. Stephanie's trying to convince everyone you're having some kind of episode. The lawyer guy looks uncomfortable." I smiled slightly. He should be uncomfortable. He's about to witness something he didn't sign up for. As we walked back toward the house, I explained briefly what I had done. Amy squeezed my arm. "You're doing the right thing, Dad. I know it hurts, but Garrett left you no choice." Through the kitchen window, I could see the family still gathered in the living room. Garrett was pacing, gesturing emphatically as he spoke to Steve and Paul. Stephanie sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, clutching her handbag. The lawyer was checking his watch repeatedly. I paused for a moment, remembering Garrett as a 12-year-old boy, devastated by his mother's death, clinging to me at her funeral. Where had that vulnerable, loving child gone? Had my own blindness to his flaws contributed to this moment? There would be time for such reflections later. Now I needed to be clear-headed and firm. I had one more revelation to share with the family, one that would change everything. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door and stepped back into the apartment, ready to reclaim not just my home but my life and dignity as well. When I re-entered the living room with Amy beside me, all conversation stopped. Garrett stood in the center of the room, his face flushed with frustration. Stephanie sat rigidly on the sofa, her knuckles white as she gripped her handbag. The others watched me with a mixture of concern and confusion. "Dad, this meeting is getting out of hand," Garrett said immediately. "I think we should continue this another time when you're feeling more yourself." I took my seat calmly, placing my hands on the folders in front of me. "I'm feeling perfectly myself, Garrett. In fact, I haven't been this clear-headed in months." Before he could respond, Stephanie's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, frowning, then excused herself to take the call in the hallway. Through the open door, we could all hear her voice rise in pitch. "What? No, that can't be right. There must be some mistake. When? How?" Her voice became increasingly agitated, but that account was, "No, I understand. Yes, he's right here." When she returned to the room, her face had lost all color. "Garrett," she said, her voice shaking. "That was the bank, the fraud department. They're freezing our accounts pending an investigation. They want you to come in immediately." Garrett's expression shifted from confusion to panic. "What investigation? What are they talking about?" Stephanie's voice dropped to a whisper. "They mentioned unauthorized transactions, forged signatures, and potential criminal charges." A desperate scream escaped her lips as the full implications hit her. "They're saying we could lose everything. The house, the cars, everything." Garrett lunged for his jacket. "We need to go now. This is some kind of mistake." He turned to his attorney friend. "Alan, come with us. We'll need you." "Actually," Alan said, standing and collecting his briefcase, "I think I should recuse myself at this point. The situation appears to involve potential bank fraud, which is outside my area of expertise." Garrett turned to leave, but Jack, Amy's husband, moved to block the doorway. "I think you should stay and finish this conversation, Garrett. Running away won't solve anything." "Get out of my way," Garrett snarled. "This is all Dad's fault. He's trying to punish me because I called him out on his confusion. He's always been vindictive when he doesn't get his way. I remained seated, maintaining the calm I had found in the garden. This isn't about punishment, Garrett. It's about consequences. For weeks, you and Stephanie have been attempting to manipulate me, undermine my autonomy, and gain control of my assets under false pretenses. That's not true, Stephanie protested weakly. I opened the largest folder on the table. I have documented evidence of everything. The unauthorized apartment showings, the falsified medical reports suggesting cognitive decline, the forged power of attorney. I turned to the family members watching in shocked silence. And most disturbingly, I have proof that Garrett attempted to access my retirement accounts without my knowledge or consent. You're making this up, Garrett insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. The security cameras I installed captured Stephanie searching through my financial documents when you thought I was at physical therapy. I nodded to Amy, who connected her laptop to the television. The screen displayed clear footage of Stephanie photographing my bank statements and investment reports. Steve stood up, his face grim. Frank, I had no idea this was happening. If I had known, none of us knew, Linda added, moving to stand beside me. Garrett told us you were becoming forgetful, that you needed help managing your affairs. Garrett's attorney friend had edged toward the door. I should mention that I was not aware of any of these activities. I was simply asked to help facilitate a real estate transaction. As realization dawned on everyone in the room, Stephanie's composure crumbled completely. She sank onto the sofa, sobbing. We didn't have a choice. The restaurant failed. The debts kept piling up. We were going to lose our house. We were desperate. There's always a choice, I said quietly. You could have come to me honestly. I would have helped you find legitimate solutions. It was Garrett's idea, Stephanie blurted out, ignoring her husband's warning glare. He said you were getting old, that you didn't need all this money anymore. He said we'd make sure you were taken care of in a nice place. A nice place 300 miles away from my doctors, friends, and family? I asked. A facility with documented cases of neglect and understaffing? Garrett made another move toward the door, but Jack stood firm. You're not leaving until this is resolved, Garrett. This is kidnapping. You can't keep me here against my will, Garrett shouted. Amy stepped forward, her expression severe. Actually, no one's keeping you here. You're free to leave, but you should know that I've already contacted the district attorney's office about the forgery and elder abuse evidence. They're expecting you. The revelation hit Garrett like a physical blow. He staggered back, collapsing into a chair. You're bluffing, he said weakly. The DA has copies of everything, Amy continued. The forged documents, the manipulated medical records, the evidence of financial exploitation. They've issued an emergency protective order prohibiting you from accessing Dad's funds or property. As the full weight of his actions and their consequences settled on him, Garrett's anger gave way to desperation. Dad, you can't do this to me. I'm your son, your only son. After Mom died, it was just us. You can't turn on me now. His words, meant to manipulate my emotions, only reinforced the painful truth. The boy I had raised was now using our shared grief as a weapon. The thought brought sadness but also clarity. I'm not turning on you, Garrett. I'm holding you accountable, which is what a parent should do. What happens next is up to you. You can continue denying responsibility, or you can begin making amends. Stephanie looked up, her makeup streaked with tears. What do you mean? Is there a way to fix this? That depends on your actions from this point forward, I said. The bank investigation will proceed regardless. But if you both acknowledge what you've done, make full restitution, and commit to getting help for the underlying issues that led to this behavior, I may be willing to ask for leniency regarding criminal charges. The room fell silent as the choice before them became clear. The manipulations, the lies, the schemes had all unraveled, leaving nothing but the stark reality of what they had attempted to do and the opportunity to choose a different path forward. In that moment of reckoning, surrounded by family who now understood the full truth, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The pain of betrayal remained, but it was tempered by the knowledge that I had found the strength to stand up for myself when it mattered most. The days following the family meeting brought swift and significant changes. As Thomas had warned, The bank's fraud investigation uncovered irregularities extending beyond my personal situation. Garrett received an immediate suspension from his position at the investment firm where he worked, pending the outcome of both internal and criminal investigations. Stephanie initially directed her anger toward me, accusing me of destroying their lives to prove a point. But within a week, after consulting with her own attorney and family, she called to request a private meeting. We met at a small coffee shop near my apartment, neutral territory for a difficult conversation. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands shaky as she stirred her untouched tea. "I need to apologize," she began hesitantly. "What we did, what I helped Garrett do, it was wrong. Inexcusably wrong. I've been telling myself we were just trying to help you, but that wasn't the truth. We were helping ourselves to your security, your future." Her candor surprised me. "What changed your perspective?" I asked. "My parents," she admitted. "When I finally told them the whole story, my father asked how I would feel if someone treated him the way we treated you. The question hit me hard. I couldn't sleep that night, imagining someone manipulating my dad that way." She wiped away a tear. "I'm so ashamed, Frank. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I understand now what we did." That conversation marked the beginning of a long, difficult process of accountability and reconciliation. I proceeded with selling my apartment, but through a reputable agency that secured a fair market price. Claire helped me purchase a comfortable 2-bedroom condominium in a senior community just 15 minutes from the cardiac center. The building had an elevator, security, and social activities that I gradually began to enjoy. Despite everything, I allocated a portion of the proceeds to help with Garrett's legal representation. Some family members questioned this decision, but as I explained to Amy, holding him accountable doesn't mean abandoning him. He's still my son. Garrett's initial response to the consequences was anger and blame. During his first court appearance, he claimed I had misunderstood his intentions, that he had only been trying to protect me from financial predators. The judge, reviewing the extensive evidence, was not persuaded and ordered him to undergo a psychological evaluation. The evaluation revealed what I had long suspected. Garrett had developed a gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control after the restaurant failed. The financial pressure had driven him to increasingly desperate measures, culminating in the scheme to access my assets. 3 months after the family meeting, Garrett called me from his therapist's office. For the first time, he acknowledged the full extent of his actions without excuses or deflection. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking, "I've hurt you in ways I can never fully make right. I betrayed your trust. I manipulated people who care about you. I lied and forged documents and treated you like you were an obstacle rather than my father." He paused, gathering himself. "I'm finally getting help for the gambling and for the underlying issues that drove me to it. I don't expect you to welcome me back into your life, but I needed you to know I understand what I did wrong. It wasn't an instant healing, nothing so profound ever is. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall of deception and denial that had separated us." In the months that followed, Garrett completed an intensive addiction treatment program, accepted a plea deal that included community service and restitution rather than jail time, and began the slow process of rebuilding his life and our relationship. My new home became a place of peace and renewal. Amy visited often, sometimes staying in the guest room for extended weekends. I joined a book club in the community and reconnected with former colleagues who lived nearby. Slowly, my blood pressure returned to normal levels, and my cardiologist noted improvement in my overall health. 6 months after moving, I invited Garrett to visit. Our conversation was awkward at first, heavy with the weight of all that had happened. But as we walked through the community gardens together, something shifted. "I keep thinking about those years after Mom died," Garrett said, stopping beside a bench overlooking a small pond. "You never faltered, Dad. You were grieving too, but you stayed strong for me. You never made me feel like a burden, even though you were suddenly a single parent with a full-time job and a heartbroken kid. You were never a burden," I said simply. "That makes what I did even worse." He sat down heavily on the bench. "I can't understand how I became someone who would hurt you that way." "Addiction changes people," I replied, sitting beside him. "So does fear. You were afraid of losing everything you'd built, and that fear led to desperate choices. How can you be so understanding after what I did? Understanding isn't the same as excusing. I understand what drove your actions, but the actions themselves were still wrong. You're facing the consequences, as you should. But that doesn't erase 40 years of being father and son. Over the following year, our family slowly began to heal. Stephanie, who had filed for divorce during Garrett's lowest point, eventually reconsidered as she saw his commitment to recovery and accountability. They began marriage counseling, addressing the dysfunction that had contributed to their financial and ethical decisions. Family dinners resumed, first at Amy's house with her acting as neutral territory, then eventually at my condominium and, after 18 months, at Garrett and Stephanie's new, modest apartment. These gatherings were initially tense, with careful conversations and awkward silences, but gradually, genuine moments of connection emerged through the discomfort. One evening, as we finished dinner at my place, Garrett asked if he could speak to me privately. We stepped out onto the balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I've been working with my therapist on making amends," he said. "Not just apologies, but concrete actions to address the harm I've caused." He handed me a folder containing a financial plan he'd developed with a certified counselor. It detailed his systematic repayment of debts, including full restitution to me, and established a transparent system for managing his finances going forward. "I wanted you to see that I'm building a life based on honesty now," he explained. "No more secrets, no more shortcuts." I reviewed the documents, noting the realistic projections and built-in accountability measures. "This is impressive work, Garrett. It can't have been easy to face all of this so directly." "It wasn't," he admitted. "But every time I was tempted to minimize or avoid something, I remembered how it felt in that family meeting when everything came crashing down. I never want to be that person again." As I looked at my son, truly looked at him without the veil of parental blindness or bitter disappointment, I saw something new emerging from the crisis we'd endured. Not the innocent boy he'd once been, nor the desperate man he'd become, but someone more complex. A person who had faced his worst self and committed to change. 2 years after that fateful family meeting, we gathered at Amy's house for Thanksgiving. Looking around the table at the faces of those who had witnessed the painful confrontation, Amy and Jack, Steve and Linda, Paul and Maria, and Garrett and Stephanie, I was struck by how much had changed. The betrayal that could have permanently fractured our family had instead led to greater honesty, stronger boundaries, and ultimately deeper connections. When Amy asked everyone to share something they were grateful for, Garrett spoke last. "I'm grateful for second chances," he said, his voice steady, "and for a father who taught me that true strength isn't about power or control, but about having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's painful. Especially when it's painful." Later, as we cleared the dishes together, I thought about the lesson that had emerged from our family crisis. True love sometimes requires difficult action. By refusing to be a victim of manipulation, by insisting on accountability while leaving room for redemption, I had ultimately given my son the opportunity to become a better man than he might otherwise have been. As parents, we often believe that protecting our children means shielding them from consequences. But sometimes, the greatest act of love is allowing those consequences to unfold, providing the painful but necessary lessons that lead to genuine growth. In standing firm against Garrett's manipulation, I had honored not only myself but also the values I had tried to instill in him throughout his life. That night, driving home to my condominium, I felt Sarah's presence more strongly than I had in years. She would have approved, I thought. She would have understood that love sometimes looks like boundaries, like accountability, like unwavering standards, even especially for those we cherish most. Have you ever had to stand firm with someone you love, knowing it might temporarily damage your relationship but ultimately lead to something healthier? It's one of life's most difficult challenges, finding that balance between compassion and accountability. If you found meaning in my story, please consider sharing it with others who might be facing similar struggles with family members. And remember to subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories about navigating complex family dynamics with both strength and heart. Thank you for listening, and I hope you find the courage to honor your own boundaries while keeping your heart open to healing.